Hey, what's going on? Today I'm going to be talking about how to create your own virtual instrument or sampler instrument using logic from your MIDI devices at home. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is you can take an old synthesizer, record each and every single note, and then create an instrument from that you can play on the go. So, for example, here I have a Yamaha PSR-36, which is an old digital FM synthesizer that has pretty unique amount of parameters that I can work with, and I want to be able to play some of those presets or presets that I created on the go. So in order to do so, I'm going to need a few things. First, you're going to need an interface to receive the audio so that you can create your presets. Another thing you're going to need is some way to capture or send MIDI data. A lot of 80s, 90s, and 2000s systems allow you to send MIDI data to the device or receive MIDI data. In this case, I'm going to need to send MIDI data from my computer straight to the Yamaha. So you can do that in a few ways. Some devices do support like USB-A to USB to transmit data. However, this one requires a USB to MIDI out. On this device particularly, it has a 5-pinned in MIDI in, 5-pinned in MIDI out, and I'm going to just be using the input port on the back of my keyboard. To plug into that, I'm going to use the MIDI out from a USB dongle to plug into that, because technically all I need to do to make this work is to send MIDI data from my computer straight into my keyboard. So let's get started. Some devices, this one included, does have a set of instructions required in order to get the MIDI data transmitted. In this case, I have to hold down the MIDI cable, or sorry, the MIDI button and the synth organ key or electric guitar key to turn on and off MIDI signals. Your own device will have its own set of unique instructions. Sometimes it's just as simple as pressing a button. So after that, I need to send audio from my keyboard straight to my interface. To do so, I have purchased some RCA left channel and RCA right channel to 1/4 inch cables so that I can plug the right channel into my interface and the left channel into my interface to record sound. After that's set up, we can go ahead and create an external MIDI device. A few things to note is you need to check this box right here, use external instrument MIDI plugin. After that, you want to select your MIDI destination. So the name of my device, for whatever reason, is USB MIDI interface. This is the device that will be transmitting MIDI data from my laptop straight into the PSR-36. After that, you're going to want to change the inputs and outputs. Generally, your output you can leave by default. That'll be wherever your audio is going. Input, however, is where on your interface that you will be receiving the audio data from your keyboard to your computer. Since I have a stereo sound set up from left and right channel, I'm going to select the input 1 and 2. Then we're going to go ahead and hit create. So, a few things to note. Sometimes you'll want to leave these as default. Sometimes you won't need to. For example, I'm only transmitting information to the first channel of the MIDI data. I'm just going to leave it here. Some devices like the 90s and early 2000s devices do support multi-channel MIDI devices that you can like stack layers to create unique sounds. You can just hit all for that case. For the input, I just have the input set. For the input volume, personally, I like to leave at a default of 0 because we want to change the sound that's coming into the instrument so that we have a really nice noise floor. And what does that mean? Well, first you want to go through a few settings on your device. So on my PSR-36, I have the master volume turned up to the max. Then I have the inputs on my channels for my left and right channel turned up as high as I can. Whenever I play a note, it will redline. And then you want to adjust the volume of your inputs down as much as you can until you're not redlining, but you're getting close to redlining. What this will do is increase the clarity of your instrument to the ratio of your noise floor. So for example, when I'm looking to record the instrument, I like to have a headroom anywhere between 1 decibel to 5 decibels. This is a little bit extreme because I want to cut out as much white noise as possible. However, if you want more white noise in your recordings in respect to your instrument recordings, you can definitely turn down that volume. Now, after that, there's a few things to note. One, with these older devices, they are more prone to having interference issues because not all the components are shielded. So pay careful attention to where you route your cables and what your cables are crossing, because some devices may give off an extra electromagnetic signal that can cause interference with your device, or even the cables that are sending audio from the device straight into your interface. Once we have these set up, we are going to create an auto sampler. In this case, mine's stereo, so I'm going to set that to stereo. Second of which, you want to run a few tests. Right now, I don't have my device connected because I'm recording from a microphone, but if I was, you would be able to hear the audio signal as I am transmitting MIDI data. So, first things first, let's go over a few settings. There are different styles of auto sampling that I want to go over that will be tailored towards your specific needs and purposes. The most common type of sampling that I do for instruments is going to be a looped sample or sampler instrument, because a lot of these older presets have a really nice drawn out note length that goes on into infinity until you let go of the notes. So let's create a few parameters to go over real quick. So right now I want to actually set the range of the lowest note that my keyboard goes to. For example, it's this one right here. Clicking inside of this range will actually tell you how far down or how far up your keyboard goes. So that way you don't have to cross-reference between your keyboard and the auto sampler. Once you figure out your range, which again, I don't have it hooked up at this moment, so this is just going off memory. Once you have your range set up, you can go ahead and change a few settings. Personally, I like to have my sampler instruments record every single note. Now this is going to take a lot longer, but it's going to be more accurate. I also don't necessarily need any round robin, because that will just re-record each note every time you play it, which of course there's a little bit of randomness every time you play an older instrument like this. However, I am very lazy and I don't need that kind of extreme detail, because for my purposes, I'm going to be adding effects later on, which will hide the subtlety of each note being exactly the same every time you press the same note. Next thing, I'm going to be setting my velocity layers. Again, this device particularly is an older device, so it doesn't send any velocity difference between how hard or how soft you press it. So I'm going to leave it at a default of 1. What that will do is it'll play the volume of your note at the loudest volume. Next thing you want to pay attention to is your velocity response, which you can just leave by default because, again, I don't have any velocity layers. However, if you do have velocity layers on your device, the number of velocity layers that you do set is how many times your keyboard will record the same note before moving on to the next note. Other settings to adjust here, I have my auto loop and auto loop end settings set roughly to 40% and 90% because I want the front end or the transient of my audio sample to not be disturbed, and I want to start looking for a loop section a little bit later until the release. So now we get into the sustain, one shot, and auto loop functions. The sustain is how long the auto sampler is holding down a note until it lets go and starts looking for example, looping segments. If you set it to one shot, you can just turn off auto loop and it'll just play each note one at a time. So for example, if I have a default piano preset that has a short decay and short sustain, and a quick attack, you probably don't need a 10-second sustain. You can probably get away with a 1 second or 2 second sustain. And with a one shot, it'll trim the silence at the end anyways. But with a longer instrument, for example, a pipe organ or a flute or a cello preset on this keyboard, I will want a longer sustain. You can set that generally between 5 and 10 seconds. Sometimes you want to go longer if the sound evolves over time, so they can look for a better loop point. Sometimes you want it to be shorter if the sound is just not very long at all. Afterwards, you're going to want to hit, actually, before we continue, another thing to pay attention is to double check that your volumes on your inputs of your interface have not changed. Now, there's a difference between holding multiple notes and holding one note to set your input range. So if you hold the lowest note on your keyboard and press it, you'll see right over here in your input what the threshold or the headroom is of that particular note. And you go to your highest note and hit the same thing. If you hit multiple notes, you will induce clipping. However, that's not going to be accurate to whenever you're recording the instrument itself. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hit continue. Once you hit sample, you're going to be prompted with creating a new folder, making a naming scheme, and naming the actual preset itself. From here, I have sampled a Emu Proteus 2500, and I have a few presets that I've made from here. And then I also have some presets that I have sampled from the PSR 36. Now, here's a few debugging things when it comes to looping, because some sounds won't actually loop properly, and I have to fiddle with settings a little bit more sometimes. So earlier I said a good range is about 5 seconds for your sustained instruments, especially when looping. And the looping method I prefer overall is going to be the Penrose Machine. That one finds your loop points the quickest and most accurately, and they seem to be pretty seamless when it comes to creating loop points for your instruments. However, I will show you what happens whenever you use the Penrose Machine on certain types of sounds. So let's go over to the PSR 36 and click on one of my bugged presets. And let's go to zone. This is definitely like an artifact that can happen to you sometimes, where you see the volume dips and then gets abruptly cut up to higher, where it has like some kind of like funky normalization going on. Let's pick another one to demonstrate a more obvious glitch. So with this one, you can see the waveform changes drastically. And if we go to the next preset, which is what it's supposed to sound like, and then compare that to the debugged one, that is a result of using the Penrose Machine preset. Now, to fix that, what I did was I changed the sustain to like about 10 seconds, so it has a much wider range of data to search for loop points, and then experimented with search with crossfade, search with reverse crossfade. Most of the time, I just use the search because it seems to be the most accurate as far as the closest step behind the Penrose Machine when it comes to creating sampler instruments that are looped. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed, and please look forward to me either releasing some of these or selling these into the future.